Ethan Cole sat in his sleek corner office 35 floors above the noisy chaos of Manhattan. The glass walls around him reflected the kind of success most only dreamed of, an empire he built from the ground up. At 37, he was one of the youngest CEOs in the tech world, regularly featured on magazine covers and business panels. His assistant, Natalie, placed a silver tray on his desk, holding a glass of green juice and a thick envelope. "Final, wedding guest list," she said with a polite smile. He nodded, distracted, scrolling through emails on his phone. "Thanks, Nat. That'll be all." When she left, he picked up the envelope and slid out the list. Each name was familiar: carefully chosen investors, influencers, old college buddies, board members. And then, halfway down the page, one name made him stop cold. Clare Evans. For a moment, his world seemed to tilt, just slightly. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the name, Clare. The girl who once believed in him when no one else did. The woman who stayed up late helping him brainstorm his first startup idea. The person he left behind when ambition consumed him and Silicon Valley called louder than love ever could. They hadn't spoken in nearly 6 years. Last he heard, she'd moved back to her small hometown. No social media, no messages, just silence. Ethan had never stopped wondering where she went or how she was doing, but he'd buried those thoughts beneath contracts, acquisitions, and flashy headlines. Why was her name here? He picked up the phone to call Natalie, but paused. The wedding was only 2 weeks away, and his fiancée's family had insisted on an expansive guest list. Maybe Claire was added by one of their mutual friends. Still, something gnawed at him. He didn't owe her anything, at least that's what he'd told himself for years. But sitting alone in that $1 million office, surrounded by everything success could buy, Ethan realized there was one thing still missing. Without another thought, he scribbled a checkmark beside her name. Then he whispered under his breath, almost like a confession, "Send her the invitation." Claire wiped ketchup off Lily's chin with the edge of a napkin, the little girl giggling as she wiggled in the vinyl booth seat. The diner was nearly empty, its worn floors and faded menus telling stories of years gone by. Claire had worked here part-time for the past year, juggling shifts between here and the local library to make ends meet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it gave her enough flexibility to be there for Lily, who had just turned 5. A stack of mail sat beside her coffee cup, bills mostly. But one envelope stood out crisp, white, heavy paper with a golden seal pressed into the flap. Claire had stared at it all morning, unsure whether to open it. When she finally tore it open, her breath caught in her throat. A wedding invitation. Ethan Cole was getting married. She reread the details, her hands trembling. It was formal, elegant, everything she expected from the man he had become. The date, the location in the Hamptons, the guest list full of people she would never know. But her name had been there, spelled perfectly. It wasn't a mass invite, it was personal and deliberate. Lily reached for her milkshake, slurping loudly. Claire watched her daughter and felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. For years she had raised Lily without ever asking for help, without sending a single letter to Ethan. Not because she was angry, not even because she was proud, but because she believed he had made his choice. When he left, he didn't just walk away from her, he walked away from a life they could have had together. Still, that didn't change the truth, and the truth had Ethan's eyes. Claire gently tucked Lily's curls behind her ear. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "how would you feel about taking a little trip?" Lily's eyes lit up. "Like an adventure," Claire smiled, though it was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Exactly like that. She didn't know what she would say to Ethan. She didn't even know if showing up was the right thing to do. But something inside her, perhaps the need for closure or maybe something deeper, told her she had to go, not for him, for Lily. The sun dipped low over the sprawling estate in the Hamptons, casting golden light over the marble fountains and manicured hedges. The wedding venue looked like something out of a magazine. White silk drapes billowed gently in the ocean breeze, and strings of lights sparkled above rows of chairs filled with people dressed in designer suits and gowns. Waiters in black and white moved seamlessly between guests offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres, while photographers snapped photos of the high-profile attendees. Ethan stood near the altar, adjusting his cufflinks, his face calm but distant. Everyone assumed it was nerves. In truth, his thoughts kept drifting back to that guest list. He hadn't heard from Claire, no RSVP, no returned letter. Maybe it had been a mistake to invite her, or maybe it had just been a moment of guilt disguised as generosity. Then, just as the music softened and the guests began to turn their eyes toward the aisle, a quiet stir passed through the crowd. It started as a whisper, then a murmur, and then nearly everyone turned to look. Claire had arrived. She walked slowly, a picture of quiet grace in a simple, pale blue dress. But she wasn't alone. Holding her hand was a little girl in a white dress with a satin ribbon tied around her waist, curls bouncing with each careful step. She looked no older than 5, and she looked exactly like Ethan. The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped. Champagne flutes froze mid-air. One of the bridesmaids gasped audibly. The resemblance was so strong, so undeniable, that it seemed to echo across the garden louder than any music ever could. Ethan turned and saw them. At first confusion clouded his features, then recognition, then something deeper, a kind of shock that knocked the breath from his lungs. His eyes locked on the child's. She stared back curiously, innocently, completely unaware of the storm she had just walked into. Claire's expression was steady but unreadable. She made no dramatic gestures, offered no explanations. She simply took a seat in the very back row as if she were just another guest, not the woman who once held his heart. And the little girl sat beside her, swinging her legs, smiling up at the man everyone thought they knew. The sounds of the wedding faded behind the thick row of cypress trees as Ethan and Claire stood face to face for the first time in nearly 6 years. The garden path behind the venue was quiet, secluded from the stairs and whispers now rippling through the crowd. The tension between them was thick, not angry or bitter, just heavy with all the words never said. Ethan's eyes searched Claire's face, as if looking for clues that time might have hidden. She looked older, but not in a way that diminished her. If anything, there was a quiet strength in her now. A resilience he couldn't name, but it was the little girl's face, those eyes, that smile that had cracked open something in him he didn't even realize was still vulnerable. "Is she mine?" he asked, his voice low and tight. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just nodded slowly. "Her name is Lily." Ethan stepped back, hands on his hips, trying to breathe. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," she said quietly. "After you moved, I called, I emailed, I even sent a letter to your old office. I never heard back. You disappeared, Ethan. I didn't want to chase you down and beg you to care." He swallowed hard, shame creeping into his voice. "I didn't know. I didn't even think to check. I just, kept going." "I know," she said, softer now. "That's why I didn't come here to ruin anything. I wasn't planning to say a word." But then that invitation came, and Lily, she started asking questions. She deserves to know where she came from. Ethan sat down on a stone bench, his hands shaking slightly. "She looks like me," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Claire sat beside him. "She has your laugh, too, and your stubbornness." For a long moment, they just sat there, both stunned by how life had looped them back together at the most unexpected time. Finally, Ethan looked up. "Can I talk to her?" Claire smiled gently. "She'd like that. She's always wanted to meet a man who could match her in sarcasm." He chuckled, eyes wet, and in that moment, something shifted, not just between them, but inside him. The wedding, the guests, the cameras, they all faded away. There was only truth now, and the chance to do something right. The hush that fell over the wedding tent was so deep, it felt like the entire world had paused to hold its breath. Guests turned in their seats as Ethan walked back down the aisle alone, his perfectly tailored suit somehow seeming too stiff for the weight he now carried. The music had stopped. The officiant looked confused. The bride, standing near the floral archway, stared at him with a growing sense of dread. Ethan took the microphone from the best man without looking at anyone in particular. He stood still for a long moment, trying to steady his voice. All around him were the symbols of his carefully constructed life, elegance, wealth, influence, but none of it seemed to matter now. "I know this isn't how this day was supposed to go," he began slowly, voice echoing through the silent tent. "Today was meant to be a celebration, a new chapter. But something happened just moments ago, something I didn't expect. But maybe something I needed more than I ever realized." Murmurs began to stir again, but no one dared interrupt. A little girl walked into this wedding with someone I once loved deeply. And when I saw her, I saw myself. Not metaphorically, literally. That child is mine. I didn't know, and that's on me. People shifted uncomfortably. The bride's father folded his arms. But Ethan didn't stop. For years, I chased this version of success. I thought if I built the biggest company, lived in the tallest penthouse, drove the fastest cars, I'd finally feel whole. But I never did. Not really. And now I know why. His voice cracked slightly, because I left behind something real. Someone real. And today, fate gave me a second chance. He turned toward the back row where Claire sat holding Lily's hand, I don't know what happens next. I don't have a perfect plan, but I know I want to be in my daughter's life. I want to be the kind of man she thinks I am. He set the microphone down gently, then walked straight past the altar and down the aisle, toward Claire and Lily. His bride never called after him. No one did. As he reached them, Lily beamed up at him, and Ethan knelt to take her hand. And in that simple moment, the real story began, not of a wedding, but of a family finding its way back together.